like, what's 5 likes equivalent to? Like 5,000 people? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure, sure. Just give it a second so we know that we're connected. All right, and we are live officially. So hello everyone, welcome you to Accessibility Talks. It's the monthly virtual meetup where we get together and chat about digital accessibility, inclusivity, usability. And each month we bring a speaker in to present a topic. And then afterwards we invite the community to ask questions and participate in the discussion. So I want to take a moment and remind folks that our group seeks to provide a friendly, safe environment. So we require all participants to adhere to the Accessibility Talks Code of Conduct. And you can find that out on our website at A11yTalks.com. And also, if you want to tag us on Twitter, you can also use that hashtag AlleyTalks, A11yTalks, something like that. I'm your host today, Carrie Fisher. I'm a senior accessibility consultant and trainer at DQ. And with me today is Mark Steadman. He is an accessibility developer consultant at DQ, and he'll be speaking on automated accessibility testing and JavaScript frameworks. But first, I want to hear a little bit more about your professional side job as an owler.
Yes, so ever since I was a kid, I have loved owls to death, and I mean to death. So I will go out, I will go find them. My wife, my son, we'll get in the car, we'll go look at it. Around here right now, Central Illinois, where I'm at, snowy owls are huge. So going out to find them, great horned owls, screech owls, whatever one's around here. I love going to find them, photograph them. Been that way since forever. Kind of a nerdy obsession, but I love it to death.
That's awesome. I'm also a birder, so we can be old people together. That's awesome. All right, but enough about owls and birds. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown about what you do maybe at DQ and a little bit more about what you specialize in?
Yeah, absolutely. So at DQ, I work on the developer services team. We actually work with clients, different people to fix accessibility solutions. And we also worked to help clients integrate some of our paid for tools and AxeCore into their unit test cases, which is some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, right? Which is why hopefully you all are on today. But we work through any developer specific issues with accessibility, and also work to get your content accessible in a way that is maintainable. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about today with this. As part of our job is doing some of these AxeCore setups and kind of testing and getting you to that definition of success that makes it so that accessibility is part of your day-to-day process. So that's just a little bit about what I do at DQ. And on my team specifically, there's a bunch of other things we do as well. So.
All right, that's awesome. Go ahead and present when you want to. And then at the end, let's talk about how we can catch you later to where we can catch you.
Absolutely. Awesome. So let's get this started. So automated accessibility testing and JavaScript frameworks. I love this subject. Actually, part of my accessibility specializations I like to get into is specifically JavaScript frameworks and accessibility with them. So talking about the actual development lifecycle, testing, all of that, that is my jam. I love this. So I'm very excited to be speaking with you all today. A little bit about me, quick introduction, really quick on top of it. Again, I'm a developer service consultant at DQ. My accessibility interests, like I said, JavaScript framework accessibility, automated testing for accessibility, and also teaching devs how to be accessibility aware. That is one of my major passions. I was a developer who once knew nothing about accessibility, and now I do. And I absolutely love talking on this subject and teaching developers how to become accessibility aware. So in this, we will talk through kind of how to make your content accessible in an automated fashion with JavaScript frameworks. I'll post my social stuff at the end as well, but Twitter, it's at Steady5063, and then I have my LinkedIn link, which again, I will put at the end of this presentation. So our objectives today, there we go. I want to go through and get you all to understand the benefits of automated testing, okay? Understand the levels of test. To understand JavaScript framework testing, you have to understand levels of test. You have to understand how it all links together. If you don't, then it can be a struggle to kind of understand where we're going with this and how it can affect your day-to-day testing for accessibility. And then also we're going to talk about ways to ensure an accessible future, right? Ensure testing is in place so that in the future, my content remains accessible, right? So those are the three main objectives today. So before we begin though, I have to do this because a lot of people love to hear these talks and say, yes, automation, I'm going to do all this stuff and I'm going to make it 100% automated. Guess what? You can't do that. Disclaimer, you must have a manual testing process in place. I can't say that enough. I'm an advocate for automating as much as possible. Trust me, been a dev, I understand it day to day. But automating accessibility only gets you so far, right? Even writing your own accessibility test cases, it only gets you so far. So what we have to look for in this case here is you have to have a manual testing place in piece. So if you're a developer on this call right now, yes, I'm going to show you automated pieces. However, I want you to know that the best thing you can do is learn to test with a keyboard, with assistive technology, all that on top of what you're already doing, right? From an automated perspective, okay? So just a small disclaimer, as I go through, again, I'm advocating for everybody using automation, but just know there is another piece to this, and that is the manual piece and learn how to do it. So let's get into it. I'm gonna talk about accessibility testing with Axcore. Axcore is our open source accessibility testing engine for websites, okay? It's secure, lightweight, built seamlessly, integrate with any of your existing test cases in an automated fashion. Contains about 90 accessibility checks. That includes WCAG single A, double A, WCAG 2.1, best practices, and some experimental rules on top of that as well. It can catch up to 50% accessibility violations automatically. That means with no manual intervention. It can help reduce the overall manual tests that are needed from that perspective. And it can help you maintain a baseline accessible framework. You're going to see that a little bit more as I get into kind of a demo with it, but it can really help maintain a good foundation of accessible content for you as you're developing your site. And it can be used as a teaching tool to help to make accessible developers. Okay, real quick story. That's how I actually got into this. I started using Axcore and our paid for tool, DevTools HTML, at my previous job. And what I did, and you'll see here in a second, is use this within test cases, running it, and actually seeing the results, using the learn more links that come with it, which again, you'll see, and basically teaching myself accessibility to where I wanted to get to learn how to test with the keyboard, how to test with assistive technology, right? So in this case here, that's what this will do for you. It can create accessible developers. And that's my overall goal. Whenever I talk about this, that's what I want. I want to create developers that are accessibility aware as we go through this. So getting into this to start with, what are the levels of test? If I take drinks during this entire thing, there's a reason. I get parched really quick because I get way too fired up for these things. So to understand JavaScript frameworks and the testing and why it's important, okay? Levels of tests. So there's multiple levels, but I'm going to go to the top 4 that we always see. Functional component testing. Okay? Functional component testing is each individual web component is tested for functionality and overall purpose. For those of you who are React, Angular, Vue, Ember developers, you know, this is where those frameworks make their money, right? They're looking at it from that perspective. They say, hey, I'm going to break everything into components. Boom. That's functional component testing. There's integration testing, which is each individual web page fully rendered is tested for functionality and full purpose. In this case, think I just go to a page with like Selenium WebDriver.js, right? That would be an example of integration testing, or end-to-end testing, which is each web application is tested from the beginning to the end, whether that's using a web crawler or even just using an in general flow-like manner across the way. And there's critical flow testing. Critical flow testing would be, I have a specific path that I want a user to go to. So it's specific data-driven flow, right? So a user comes to my site, they put something in the cart, they look at details, they put something in the cart, go to the cart, they check out, they go, right? That's a critical flow. So those are some of the main levels of test. We're really going to talk about 2 in this. And that's where it comes down to for JavaScript frameworks. So why is it different in JS frameworks, right? Think about it like this. In order to effectively test for accessibility in an automated way, you have to hit multiple levels of test, right? If you cannot hit those levels of test, you run a major risk of issues still appearing on your site over and over and over again, okay? It's somewhat of a myth out there. I want to say myth because There's a lot of misconceptions. If you go to Stack Overflow, you get all these different sites. There's a lot of misconceptions of how this all works, right? So one of them being that if I test my components only, so I'm not saying I'm a React developer, okay? If I test my components only for accessibility issues, I'm good, hands-free, I'm covered, I'm clean. That's actually not the case. Multiple levels of tests exist for a reason. If I use those components on multiple pages, right, there might be a different use case for those. So I'm going to use an example here. All right. I see this. So again, I work with different companies and different organizations, different groups. And this is what I do. I work to get these things into their test environment, talk to them about how best to use accessibility testing. So here's a great use case. A company creates components in Angular for a reusable library, right? Centralized team, they make them, okay? And they're reusable. Those components can be consumed in one way or another somewhere else in the organization, right? So they can be used on different page content. They're small reusable components. Mainly it's a framework that someone wants to use, so for consistent styling, anything like that, right? Then the company requires that these be tested for accessibility issues, okay? Awesome, that's fantastic. That's what a lot of people come to me with. So to not slow down the process, the framework team, the QA, decided to add automation in to speed up the testing process. Woo, awesome. That's where I would come in and say, you're missing something, okay? And that missing something, a lot of times I can sit here and speak it to you and you'll be like, well, yeah, but like, what do you actually mean when you say this, right? That's great. If this company right here says, hey, my Angular components, we're going to test those, get them out the door, boom, we got them accessible and they're out the door. Awesome, okay? And we're just talking automation here. Even if I had a manual test case intervening just for these components, the same can be true here. So let's go to this use case. So I like to look at it like this. For every test case has to have an action, a goal, and a result, right? Or your overall testing suite in this case would have to have an action, a goal, and a result. In this case here, if I just do component testing, this is my action. I test my components with AXCore. Awesome. My goal is to ensure that all components are accessible to our consumers. Fantastic, 2 for 2. Third, my result is why does our QA still see automated issues when testing, even though we're testing all those components? That doesn't make any sense, right? Correct, but it does make sense. So think about it like this. That team, remember my team, the Angular team, they make those components, they send them off to another team. Let's see, the team is like a My Account, so you have a login page, right? And they're using that and they see accessibility issues. So they take AXCore and they tested their integration tests and they say, what are you talking about? There's still 7, 8 issues that are on here. Why am I seeing that? You want to know why? Because there's not a second layer of test there, okay? The number one thing that happens is a lot of times components, specifically in JavaScript frameworks, are tested at one level or singularly. What I mean by singularly is they're tested by themselves on an island, not with everything else on the page. So a lot of things can slip through the cracks. And that is the first thing that I see whenever I talk through JavaScript framework testing. One level of test will not get you there, right? So how do we do that from an perspective? We're going to see an example here in just a minute, but let's look at it from another lens really quick. So let's say I only do end-to-end testing. That's the first thing people ask me right after. They go, well, then why the heck would I even do end-to-end test? Why would I even do component testing? I'll just do the integration testing. That'll tell me all the results and we'll get it out the door and going. Awesome. Okay, so let's do it again. Action, goal, result. My action, I test my page level content or my end-to-end flow with AXCore. Fantastic, 1 for 1. Goal, I want to ensure my customer-facing content, fully rendered content, has no accessibility issues. Cool, again, 2 for 2. The result, this is great. First few results, I'm gonna make a little caveat. First few results, you might say, awesome, we sent these back, we got all the issues fixed. The real result, long-term, is how do we keep seeing the same issues over and over again on our automated scans? This is ridiculous. Guess what? You took component testing out of the loop. So what ends up happening is now your components, you have developers who haven't or aren't learning to be accessible developers and test their content. So guess what? They just make content, don't care what it does, says, yep, it looks great to my spec, it's out the door, right? That therein lies a huge difference, right? So we can kind of see where this falls into with JavaScript frameworks, right? You have to have both go hand in hand. Now, there's a multitude of different ways to do this, right? And just know the way that I'm going to show you is just one way. There are tons of different ways to do this across the board. Now, the example I used was Angular, right? This is great, but let's get into an actual working example, because a lot of you probably are thinking, in practice, this looks great, right? But how does this actually look when I actually get into testing my content? Will this actually change any differently? So I am going to show you a full working example. And while I do this, I want to demonstrate the website. So the other thing on top of this too, along with the super nerdy thing that I told you about me liking owls, I actually am a avid, and I mean avid, Star Wars fan. So naturally, the website that I choose to make locally on my machine is a lightsaber emporium site. And yes, this website is made to be awful on purpose because I have a lot of accessibility issues. And by the way, one tidbit, once you learn to be an accessible developer, it is extremely hard to make inaccessible content. So making some of these things is difficult on the way to make it with it. So this is what we're looking at, lightsaber emporium site. I'm gonna buy my lightsabers up, right? Make something that's really awesome and sweet. So let me show you a really simple example, okay? Let's start with component-based testing, all right? So this is my project, all right? I have my test folder. I have my component testing inside here, okay? Component or functional testing, depending on what you call it. There's a multitude of different names for the test cases that you want to use, okay? Within this, then, I am using Jest with testing library, so React testing library, all right? And I'm going to use the footer as an example really quickly. So normally when I tell people to set up accessibility scans, I will tell you the one thing you want to do is actually just add them to what you already have, right? So in this case here, the actual footer that you're looking at, I have test case already ready to go. Has it loaded, list number, everything with it, right? That's my usual test cases. Now you can get way more in depth. I know this is just an example, but again, I'm just using that to showcase you can add an accessibility scan right into this. So just know there's a lot of different Axe Core integrations out there. Water drink number 2. And for this, for all intents and purposes, I'm using Axe Core as the actual JavaScript file itself, just for example purposes. There's React Axe, there's React Jest pieces, there's a bunch of different matchers out there that you can use all to your liking. I'm just doing this for example purposes, just using raw Axe Core. Again, you can use whatever you want to with it on here, okay? So within my actual test case, I bring an Axe Core, import into it, okay? Again, here's my regular test cases. I'm just gonna add another test to it, call it accessibility check, okay? And what I do is I just take the container. So using React Testing Library, I render my footer. I use the container. The container from React Testing Library is just the actual raw HTML that comes out of it, all right? So within Axe, I run axe.run, okay? And then put the container inside of it, all right? So now it has the HTML to run the Axe Core rules engine against. And then I'm gonna get my results back. And from my results, okay, I'm gonna look at results and the violations and the length of them, okay? So inside the results object, I have violations, incompletes, passes, inapplicable ones, right, inside there. What we're looking at is just the violations that come back from it. The violations themselves are going to tell me what are the actual WCAG issues with my page, right, or with my component, excuse me, getting already ahead of myself. So in this case here, I say results.violations.length. I expect it to be 0, all right? So if there's more than that, it will fail my test case, right? So that's the idea behind it. So again, adding this in is simple as importing, bringing it into here, and then just saying, expect this to be 0. Done. That's as simple as you can do it. Now, for demoing purposes, I'm using a custom reporter that I wrote that actually puts these to log files so that we can kind of have a visualization. A lot of teams that I work with, to see the violations, to see the issues, they'll take this and they'll console log out what the issues are. Maybe have a built-in util that kind of does that for them. In this case here, I'm just taking the reports, sending the violations, and reporting them back as log files, which you'll see here in just a second. But that's just for demo purposes. Again, multitude of different ways to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my code, and I'm going to run my functional test cases. All right. Now, this is day to day. So every time I go and build within a CI/CD pipeline, anything like that, this is running against my content, giving me results back from it. Right. So you'll notice I'm going to make this way bigger so y'all can see. There's my footer component just ran. Okay, cool. So I look and I say, I expected there to be 0 violations. I got 2. Man, I got 2 accessibility violations came back from it, right? And ooh, look, some of my other ones. I have 2 and 1. What? All right. Well, now think about it like this. I'm a developer, okay? I run my content, I make a new component, I make changes, boom, I've got accessibility results right back in my lap. Yes, it's 50%, but let me tell you, it's a baseline of 50% that can make your content baseline accessible, right? A lot of the issues you see are some of these simple accessibility issues just stacking on top of each other, and the content becomes inaccessible because the base of your application is not accessible, such as these components. So these things are major issues that you need to fix along the way. So let's just take a look really quick. Let's say I'm in a developer shoe right now, all right? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up this Ally reports folder that I created for my customer reporter, okay? And open the components and then go into this footer Ally log, all right? And inside of here, this lays out where my accessibility violations are. So let's take a look. Issue description. Form elements must have labels in my footer. Well, form elements must have labels. Well, I thought this looked, oh, wait. Let's take a look really quick. I'm a developer, I'm looking at, oh yeah, I definitely did not associate that label with that input field. How about that? So right away, instant feedback. Okay? I'm gonna go right back to my code itself. I'm gonna go actually to my footer components, and you're gonna notice, yes, there is nothing in here that connects these two. So I'm gonna use HTML4. For those of you who do not know, and before anybody starts jumping the gun on me, HTML4 is React's way of saying for some reason. I don't know, it's probably a reserved word. Somebody who knows more about React can probably say that. It's weird, I know, just like class name is class, uppercase name. I don't know why, but anywho, that's what we're doing with this. So this will get the association down there. So let me take this, put it down here. We'll go example message. Awesome. Thank you, Monkai Pro. I don't use you, and you keep saying that I'm going to use it. Awesome. Okay, so that's one. So let's go to the other issues. Okay, there's the other one there. Okay, cool. Oh, all right. So I have UL and OL must only directly contain list items. What do you mean? What do you mean only must contain just list items? It's got list items there. So let's see. It says okay. Well, you know what? Let's just go to it really quick. Let's go see inside here. Oh yeah, I didn't know that. Horizontal row inside of a list. Guess what? Accessibility violation. But because I got the immediate response, I can go right back to my footer.js. I can actually see the HRs right here. I'm going to drop those out. Boom, ba-doom. Gone. I'm going to resave this. And now I'm going to come back here, go back to my console and run npm run test functional, and actually run the functional test cases themselves. Now when the footer runs across the way, I should see 0 and it should pass the actual test case that came through. But let's see if I missed something. Uh-oh, foot list changed. Oh, okay. Well, now that I removed that HR, one of my other test cases that was just there in general has changed. So let's change that. So instead of 5 items, there's 4. Let's rerun this again. And now it should have 0. They're coming back from it. That was not accessibility violation, so everybody knows. All right, awesome. So if I go to my past test cases now, I'm going to see pass, and ta-da, footer is passing now. Awesome. Okay, so that's a typical flow that I see with teams that use Axcore to test their actual components. It's awesome. Let me tell you why. Because you're getting that immediate response back from it. One thing to note for everybody on this call, if I open up my actual log again, where the actual footer log was, actually, let me just use another one that has an accessibility issue. There we go. In here, there's actually links to our DQ University pages in here. So it's help URLs. If I actually open this, this will take you to our public facing DQ University pages. They'll tell you what the issue is, how to fix it, why it's an issue, the big one, and who it affects along the way, right? Again, this is the big one, why it matters. You know, a lot of people look at this and just say, accessibility is just another thing. This is annoying. I don't want to do it, right? Figure out why it matters. Build it into your mindset that this does matter. People have to be able to use your content in a multitude of different ways. It has to be inclusive to be able through it. So this is one way to do it. And this is how I became an accessible developer, was using stuff like this and then expanding my knowledge on top of it, right? So just know this is in there as well. So if you don't know, and a developer went to this and said, hey, I don't understand how this works, you can do it this way, just like this, okay? So let's fix these last couple things here, all right? So inside my actual cart item, so it says cart item has a couple of issues too. Okay, let's go to my cart component really quick. If I go into it, where is my cart item component? Awesome, all right. If I look at the accessibility issues that are in cart item, let's go to the log report really quick, just real quick. Okay, expected HTML at div role data. Ooh, if anybody is accessibility wizard, they're gonna know that role data is not a role. Awesome. Just public service announcement. If you use roll of data, it's not a roll, so quit using it. I keep seeing it on websites all over the place. I don't know why, and I don't know who's putting that out there, but it's not real. And the other one then is image alt. So on top of this, again, this is one that actually comes up over and over and over and over and over again. People allow developers to put in their own specific images sometimes, like the actual source URLs or where they're coming from. Again, make sure that you include an actual alt piece. In this case here, this is a decorative image, so I'm just adding alt equals null. But if it were something that needed alt, allow them to actually use the props or some data in there to give an alt attribute, because if not, then you run the risk of it kind of going, south really quick. So for time purposes, I'm going to jump and do, I think I have one more component that's on here, listing component. Yes. So if I go to listing component, my listing component lists out the different lightsabers. So for instance, like Mace Windu's lightsaber, because Mace Windu's the bomb. If I go here, add alt of null, again, being described on the page, so the alt can be null on there. Now I'm going to go back, run my functional test one more time. So when this ends up running, I'm a developer, I look at it and I say, woo, zeros. Awesome. I have no accessibility violations. Good to go. Now, let's go back to that example we talked about earlier. Now I'm a React team that's making accessible components. I look at it and I say, hey, I've made my components accessible and I've shipped them to you. So I should make them, and even if I do a manual testing piece from this too, right? These should be accessible now, right? Let me show you where that mistake comes in gravely from a developer's perspective. So it's really easy to look at this and say, hey, I've got my components tested and now it's on you to fix them. However, teams that do component libraries or make components individually, right? Maybe your team just makes them individually and uses React to build out all their pages too. What ends up happening is teams will inherently say it's on that, it's on that development team that consumed them, right? Because they consumed them and they had to consume them wrong. I'm telling you from personal experience, that is wrong, and that mindset is wrong probably about 95% of the time. Because what ends up happening is components are tested in such isolation that they don't actually see their effect on the entire page. Example being what I'm going to show you here in 1 second, which is an integration level test using Selenium WebDriver.js and Xcore, and it'll show you what the actual issue is. So let me show you kind of how this would work. So let's say I am, for testing purposes and example purposes, this is all one application. But let's say I'm a different team and I have an integration test suite, right? Or let's say on my team, I have an integration test suite that puts all my stuff out there. I'm going to go and use this shop spec as an example. So again, I'm using Selenium WebDriver.js inside of here. So I basically am going to take something that an object I call Axe Builder and require it. So Axe WebDriver.js with Selenium WebDriver.js up top. Okay. Once I bring that in, before all my test cases are ready to rock, I'm going to create a new WebDriver. Okay? And I use Chrome for my stuff. You can use Firefox, you can use Edge, whatever you want to with it. And when I have that driver, I'm going to make another object called Axe Driver. And that's going to take that Selenium WebDriver and wrap it in the Axe Builder itself so that Axe can inject itself into the page and scan the page content for accessibility issues. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the shop page. Now I'm doing this with localhost. There are a numerous amount of people I work with that do this. They'll fire up their application using like React scripts, even if it's like a shell application, and they can see the page content they're getting to. Again, I'm adding this to my test cases. So if you are an integration tester, right, that's on this call, you notice I have page load, total listings, listing bunny rendered, right? And at the very end, I say, is it accessible, this page? That's as simple as you need to do it. So what I do is I call axedriver.analyze. I take the results. Same thing you saw before with my components. I'm going to report the violations back in. And I'm going to expect that the results, that violations at length, be 0. Boom. Integration testing complete. Awesome, right? So I'm going to use this shopping page as a great example for that isolated component testing issue, right? So I'm going to fire up npm run test integration. I know, super creative naming, right? This is going to fire up my application, all right? And it's going to run my integration tests. So let's roll, go. Going to fire up all my integration test cases. They come back. Awesome. It's still running. Sweet. Okay. So I use shop. Logic, okay, on the actual page. So on the actual page itself, this page is using all components that I've used, okay, and created in this application. If that was the case, and I just tested the components only, Didn't I expect there to be 0 issues back from this? Who? Therein lies the problem, right? So I have best practices turned on for this. Okay, so I think there's about 3 best practices per page that are on this issues. Okay, I shut that off. I still have 4 issues that are not. All right. Let me show you some of the issues that come back from this. So I'm going to go in here into my actual Ally reports folder again, integration, and go into the shop page. All right. And I'm going to go all the way up to the top. I apologize. All right. So we're going to look at some of these things and kind of look at it and say, okay, let's figure out what's going on here. So I am looking at, see, expected HTML H5 to have no violations. Okay. Required RA attributes must have HTML. Huh. Okay. All right. Well, there's one violation with it. How'd that get there? Huh. Interesting. And then, oh, color contrast. I'll come back to color contrast in just a minute with that. Ooh, big one. Guess what? You isolate your components, and guess what ends up happening? A lot of people use the same IDs. Duplicate IDs. Duplicate IDs are a major issue. So in this case here, I have 2 anchors that show up. So let me bring up my application really quick. If I go to my shop page, anchors, more details, add to cart, more details, add to cart. They all have the same ID. Duplicate IDs all over the place. Screen reader can't parse the actual page out. Blah. Okay. One accessibility violation that's added on top of what we already have. Okay. Another one with it. So let's see, where did that guy go? Heading levels should increase by 1. That's best practice. But again, another one that comes out to it. Images must have alt text. That one slipped through the cracks on me as I was testing through. All right, HTML must have 1 landmark. That would be a best practice in there. Yeah. All page content must be described by that. Cool. That's best practice. Oh, now I'm down to my favorite part. This is one of the coolest parts of testing your content with Axe Core. We give back results that say these are 100% foolproof accessibility violations. We put them back in results.violations. Okay. There's also a piece that's called incomplete, or if you've used our Axe extension, it's called needs review. Okay. This is where integration testing can get pretty nifty because it can show you a lot of issues that this can cause. So what I have here is this one says HTML found at about needs review. Okay. On the issue description, links with the same name have similar purpose. Check that links have the same purpose or intentionally ambiguous. Wait, what? But how is that the case? I tested my content and I have an about and I have an about. What if they go to the same page? Okay, cool. If they go to the same page, okay, no sweat. It's going to be the same thing with it. But how about this? These actually come up as issues. All right. So more details. All right. Add to cart is a link. Yes, it's the same text, but guess what? It goes to different places. It goes to the same place. More details. Well, I have a window saber, assist saber, cross saber, and a double blade saber. So guess what? Those are probably going to go to different details pages. So how do I know the differentiation between them? Boom, another accessibility violation found. Now, again, these are under needs review, so it's things that you have to look at and manually go through. But again, it's things to think about that have been added to my page content along the way. So if you want to look at it from a pure accessibility violation standpoint, I now have 1, 2, and then even 3 ones that are coming onto here because HTML lang attribute is not been set either. Okay. So integration testing, showing you my components along the way, right? That truly can set the stage to show you isolating stuff like this can really cause a lot of accessibility violations, specifically on a page. Another example of this, right, is let's say I have, or another example of kind of testing isolation. On this page I have right here, you'll notice this fully rendered, lovely, beautiful colors. I choose green because Luke Skywalker's the bomb. He's dope. So in this page itself, you'll notice all the colors are rendered. Depending, I'm going to say this right now, everybody's going to jump me on this one. Depending on how you ever test case stuff, at a component level, yes, you could use style components, get the actual styling from it, and get the results. A lot of times teams don't have those set up that way. So their components they're testing are not color contrast testing. Boom, boom, boom. Right here, you can get those results back, right? And that allows you to actually see the color contrast on a fully rendered page and get the results back from them. Now, people use things like Storybook and things like that to render them out. That's totally fine. I get that 110%, but there are some scenarios where color contrast is new and only tested at an integration level. Again, reason to have something like a Storybook or even a small integration test along the way with it, okay? Now, this is just one example of that. I also have another page that runs. If I go to cart within here, you're gonna notice, and I'm willing to bet some of the accessibility advocates in here are gonna see it right away. This cart component, when I ran my test against it, it came back clean. So let's just look at this cart component really quick. I'm going to go to the component itself, and I'm going to go to a cart item. All right. And another public service now. You're going to notice all my React components are using just basic HTML. Guess what? You can use basic HTML and React components, and it's totally fine. And you can use semantics. Thumbs up. Same with Angular. Same with Vue. Guess what? It's easy. It's easy, easy, easy. All I'm doing is render and rendering regular HTML out. Don't use divs for everything. Please don't. So in this here, you're going to notice. Actually, no, I want data input. Ha! Okay. In this data input, I'm sure most of you can see what's wrong right now. All right. Again, these are practical examples that I am pulling from stuff that I have seen. In this case here, I have a label with an input. That label has the same ID. The input itself has the same ID. Right away, in an integration level, you're going to tell me one thing. That one thing is I'm going to see duplicate IDs again, right? In this case, I have ARIA labeled by this. Guess what? I'm going to get ARIA. Okay, so the input has ARIA labeled by the ID for the label. Guess what? If anyone's going to it, this is going to be accessibility violation. ARIA attributes like ARIA labeled by can't use the same ID. You run the risk of just being bonkers with what it's reading on the page itself. So if I go back to the page, you'll notice I have first name here. Let me just inspect this. Yeah, ID, the exact same data IDs across the board. And guess what? If I go to the report, okay, so I go to integration, I go to, where do I want to go to? Cart page. There we go. All right, there we go. IDs using ARIA and labels must be unique. I have duplicate ID ARIA pieces. This happens all the time. Trust me, I see it all the time. My teammates and my team see it all the time. Just isolate component pieces. Heading levels, again, increasing by 1. There's an image alt at the very top, right? But another one that's on here that's going to be interesting to you all is some of the different things that we see with this is another needs review that's very interesting. So on this page, I have details and by again, okay? And one of the results I get back from this, again, I like to use the incomplete data for my stuff, right? So when I look, or excuse me, my test case, not my stuff. And in my test cases, what I end up doing is I like to add incomplete for a needs review because it's nice to have to say, hey, let's just go back and look at this really quick and see what the accessibility violations are for this, okay? So I've already got 2 issues, got 3 issues actually, that have gone to an integration level piece. Another one that doesn't get caught goes back to kind of color contrast, differentiation of links. Details and by again that I'm tabbing to right now, they're actually links. There's no way to differentiate them. Yes, there's a focus indicator around which allows me to get to them, but there's no way to distinguish in a group of text if they're just text or they're not, right? Again, if you have style components, sure, you can do that 110%, but it's easier to see at integration level, all right? So we're kind of seeing the pattern that I'm getting at here is if you test at one level and not the other, you run the risk. So if you test at component level and not integration level, you run the risk of not seeing the full picture of your components from an accessibility standpoint. If you test at an integration level only and not at a component level, guess what ends up happening? All the stuff that I just showed before when I ran my component test where this whole thing came back 110% clean, guess what ends up happening? We end up seeing more and more issues because you have developers that are not accessibility aware. And I want to make that painstakingly clear because the best thing you can do is create developers that do have accessibility in mind, even if it's just automation to start with, right? I guarantee you the fire, the passion that comes with it. I mean, I'm talking to you right now because I'm living breathing proof of doing it. The fire and passion to get that, to learn, manual to automation, right? All that will come with time, but teaching developers to be accessible developers, that keeps all of those issues that keep recurring over and over again. A perfect example of someone I've worked with before, they just did integration testing, they fixed all their stuff one time, and then it became inaccessible again, okay? Because they weren't doing component-based testing and they weren't using some strategies along the way. So for this last half of it, because again, at the beginning, I promised that we would talk about some of the other strategies we can do. Because the next step after this, once we kind of understand, hey, now that I have components testing, integration testing on the way, right? Now I want to maintain my accessibility in my framework, right? And here's some strategies and guidance that I've picked up over the time that I've been doing this. So start small, work big, right? So if this is your first journey, right, doing this, and you're actually testing for the first time, and start small. Prioritize it by impact levels. Prioritize it by maybe components first, right? If you actually do have components and the actual pages themselves, prioritize it, right? Prioritize it specifically by the impact level. So critical, serious. I want to fix the blockers and criticals first. Once I get those, then I'll move to the next one. Or maybe I want to fix a specific rule set first, right? Whatever that is, pick a strategy with it to start small and then work your way up to fix those accessibility issues. Fixing it one time and then not having a strategy for it back through can cause a lot of issues. So start small, work your way up, fix the issues. Another one, level 0 strategies. So let's say you are more mature, all right? I know a lot of people probably listening to this right now are saying, we already do some of this stuff, right? Awesome. If you do, you're fantastic. The one thing I would suggest is doing a level 0 strategy. There's multiple different ways to call it, but I like to call it level 0 strategy. Aim to keep 0 accessibility violations in your automatic scans. Keep it at 0 at all costs. And what I mean by that is, yes, go hardcore. Okay. Say, I am not going to let things out the door. I'm not going to publish this component until it says 0. That is a level 0 strategy. I have seen this as far as maintaining accessibility throughout the application and keeping stuff accessible. I have seen this done in practice, and it is awesome if you can have that. I know there's manual testing that comes on top of that, but having that baseline accessibility for it and keeping level 0 is golden from that standpoint. Create a rule set. So AxeScore does allow some configuration that comes along with it. So when I say create a rule set, some issues can take longer to fix. So let's say you don't want to run color contrast. Okay. I say this, I'm going to say a caveat, you still are responsible for it. But let's say color contrast goes back to the designer's feet, right? And in order to get stuff out the door right now, you can't necessarily have color contrast piece with it. You can configure it to say, hey, I don't want to run this rule right now, but I am going to come back to it, right? With that caveat that you are going to come back to it, but there is ability to do that, okay? And the last one, this is pretty cool. We didn't get into this much today because this is more about automation for just an actual just point and click and go. But create a regression suite that checks keyboard functionality of your components. If you want to be way mature in your process for accessibility testing, let's say I have a list of checkboxes, or I have a list of radio buttons or something like that in there. I can write keyboard functionality tests that check to make sure that the keyboard is working properly for that content. And that can actually be a regression suite to make sure that all my stuff is working properly, especially if you have custom widgets. If you have custom widgets that use ARIA like crazy, I highly suggest writing a regression suite. Does it take away from the fact that you should manually test? Yeah, you can, that's debatable, but it does allow you to understand that your content is still working the way it should, have the proper ARIA roles, all that stuff. So having a regression suite outside of just an AxeScore scan is a great way to ensure that any of your custom components really maintain that accessibility. And my last one, this is more a message to everybody that's on here. So one of the biggest downfalls of accessibility testing and just testing in general, you know, whether you're using JavaScript framework, anything with it, it doesn't evolve with the project, right? The best story I can think of is, you know, a group that was very well done within my previous job. They were doing so well, accessibility testing, blah, blah, blah. Every single component that came out the door accessibility testing, component level, integration level. Well, when they started to change how they were doing their project, they went from React to Vue. Guess what got left behind? Accessibility testing out the door because they forgot it. Another example I have, one group went from using just basic React to they started using, I think it was like React Semantic UI, a library with it. Guess what they did? They left accessibility in the rear. They didn't update any of their test cases, didn't adjust any of their regression suites, right? And now all of a sudden they start seeing accessibility issues go out the door, right? Don't get stagnant in what you do. Be proactive in the accessibility testing that you're doing. If you're doing an AxeScore scan against your content, whether that's in React, whatever it is, awesome. That's fantastic. But know that that does not just stay put and just scan with it. Yes, the example I showed shows the simplest way to do it. Point, click, scan, give me the results. Awesome, right? But know that things do change. New components come along, right? So in order to maintain effectiveness, you got to go above and beyond. You know, in a world that loves to be stagnant right now and stay where it's at, think about it like this. I'm a new developer and I come to your team, right? And I see your testing suite, I see all the stuff you do, you tell me the process. If your process itself doesn't have a standard for creating new content, what am I going to do? I'm just going to make a new component, write some test cases and say, whoop, it's good to go. Have a standard for creating your components or your web content that says an accessibility test is needed along the way. That can guarantee that anybody who is new into your content or into your team, that ensures that they know you take accessibility seriously, right? Works wonders, allows them to actually know specifically what the issue or what you're going to get into when they get there, right? This is a standard. It's expected of you. If you do that, if you don't do that, then they're just left to wonder, that's cool. They ran some accessibility scans, must have been an issue before. You think that's crazy. I see it all the time. Okay? Test different functionality of components as well. So as you get going, you do generic scans. Let's say you get into some stuff, and let's say there's different states, colors, actions, things like that come along the way. Make sure you get all of that, scan all of that, adjust your test cases. It goes back to the first point. Don't get stagnant. Keep going with it. Adjust. Go on the way. And then last but not least, I said this in the second slide. I'm going to say it again. Learn to check your content with assistive technology and with a keyboard. Okay? Go above and beyond. Manually testing your content is one of the best things you can do. It can take a lot of pressure off your QA folks, make it go a lot smoother. And even so, it makes you a better developer along the way to be able to do that and be able to go with it and get some pieces with that. So in short and in summary, this is my last slide on here, JavaScript frameworks have a load of different issues that come with testing. And I hope that seeing the different levels of tests from component functional testing, right, to integration kind of show you the different levels that are needed to maintain that accessible base. And also some strategies here that we can show that would show you how to maintain that accessibility over a long period of time. Because my goal whenever I do these is to ensure that to kind of give real world scenarios. And I hope that some of the things I've shown today will fit to the scenarios that you've seen. Because again, I've lived through them. I've seen them working on developer services here at TQ. And I know the JavaScript frameworks are kind of those, it's kind of an area in accessibility that's left to the wayside. There's a lot of folks from an accessibility standpoint that love to say the JavaScript frameworks, they point the finger and say, no, it's their fault that they're inaccessible. It's not the framework's fault. It's the developers. Developers have to know you can make content accessible easily. You can make semantic HTML in React, Angular, Vue, Ember, all of that. It comes down to the want and the will to do that. And I'm hoping that by you all being here, you can see a better strategy for testing your content and also learn some new things and have some new strategies in place. So with that, I will say, are there any questions?
That's awesome.
I'm also going to chug water.
All right. Why don't you stop the share when you get a chance, and that way people can see your face in full view. Ignore my messy office in the background there. All right, so a lot of really good questions we've got already. So from Sam XAX, how do you conceptualize or imagine all kinds of tests for so different accessibility profiles? For instance, like a users with high contrast setting and screen reader active.
That's a really good one. So like I said, going back to some of the scenarios that we talked about before. So high contrast mode, believe it or not, some testing frameworks, don't quote me on this. I think Selenium is adding in some pieces so you can actually add in a high contrast mode and see what it looks like with that. Some of the other ones we're talking about, it just goes back to automation can only get you so far, right? Even regression testing automation wise, right? So like I write custom test cases myself outside of Axe Core. That just comes down to a manual process you have to do to account for all different variations, all different inclusions you have to have with your content. Axe Core will get you, those 90 checks along the way, but it won't get you to that full-fledged, like, hey, when I'm done with this, my site's 100% accessible. You'll never hear me say that along the way, especially from an automation standpoint. Some of those do require the manual intervention, the manual testing to do that, right? But in this case, if you're looking for something for like high contrast mode, there are ways to do that, but testing-wise, it's not really going to change much. Color contrast isn't really based on high contrast mode, right? It's just based on general accessibility. I'm losing my train of thought. It's just based on 4:5 to 1 color contrast ratio. It's not based on high contrast mode. So, but you can add a test case in that for it to check to make sure that your content does look good, but that would be more of a regression test like I talked about your custom writing.
So you're saying there's more to life than just JavaScript and testing? There's actually humans on the end of that? Yeah.
Yep. As much as we want to say it's a completely automated process, and I would, love to say that, you do have to have that intervention there because you have to have the ability to go through it in a way that somebody else, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and see how that content is going to be. You can't just have a computer do that for you. So, and again, I'm advocating for it here. It's in here, but I'm telling you, you have to have some manual intervention with that along the way.
And Tony asked a great question after that. What is a good and accessible technique to avoid these duplicate ID issues that you seem to run into all the time?
Yep. So normally what I would suggest is it's kind of twofold. One is to not code to an ID. Ooh, everyone on here is going to like shudder for a second. Try not to. Okay. If you can, use class names, things like that, because if you use an ID, what's up happening is you code to that. A lot of times, if you get a duplicate ID, everybody looks at me and they go, but Mark, if you do that, I got to change all my stuff around, right? That's number one. Try to code to classes more than IDs. I know that sounds crazy, and a lot of people are going to lose their mind when I say that, but try to do that. Number two, there's a multitude of different things you can do. You can do a random number at the end. So like a ton of applications you see right now, this sounds nuts, but like in Angular React, you'll see like the ID be like Mark is dope, and then it'll be like 5,000 numbers after the end of it. I know it's long, but that is one way to get a separate ID, is just to have a random string or a number at the end of it. Again, that's where I say try not to code specifically to an ID because it can get a little hairy from that standpoint. But that is one way to avoid it coming down.
That's a great answer. We have a few more questions. I want to make sure that we get enough time, but if we don't, Mark, I did post your Twitter and your LinkedIn account, so 2 different ways at least to get a hold of Mark after the episode is finished. So definitely keep that conversation going, but let's see if we can get in a couple more before the top of the hour. Sound good?
Cool. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. All right, we have another one from Sam XAX, another question related to JavaScript. With all your mentorship and professional experience, which framework seems to be the most accessibility friendly? Or maybe even like which one could be worth learned more deeply, like if you had to choose now?
Okay, so I love this question because this question, every time I think I've answered this question, I answer it differently, but not in the way that you think. So let me give you kind of a rundown of what I think from an accessibility perspective. Let's start with Angular. I'm gonna start far Angular side, okay? Angular is very strict in the way that it lets you do stuff. So for instance, there's JavaScript, right? Or if you're doing TypeScript, there's TS, the TS file with it. There's the actual strict HTML file. So it renders you and makes you use HTML with it. So there's an actual physical HTML file. It's very limited in the things you can do and add to it. So from an accessibility standpoint, in my mind, that makes it pretty cool because you are strictly using HTML, right? And there's a lot of good linters that come with Angular that tell you should be using. So like if, for instance, there's a linter out there, I can't remember, it's not TS-lint, it's a different linter. They'll actually tell you when you're actually making your content, if you put a div with a row of buttons, you can be like, hey, why don't you just use a button, right? Because it has that .html file in there. So there's that with Angular. It's very strict and it allows you to Vue. Let me go to React first, and I'll come back to you. So React in general, React is super duper open. The one thing that I always say about React is that it gets a bad rep because a lot of people think of it as this gigantic open piece that anybody can do anything with. And guess what? That actually is the case. React has so much openness to it. That's what makes it awesome, and that's what makes it as well. React has 1,000 different UI frameworks that go with it. A lot of them are inaccessible. There are a lot, so like Semantic UI, off the top of my head, Rekit. There's a couple other ones out there that are accessible to the most part along the way, which is cool, but you have to know where to look. So the one thing with React is, yes, it can be accessible, depending on the approach that you take to accessibility and the framework that you actually use behind it. But that comes with a huge caveat, right? What one do you choose? You can choose an inaccessible framework, right? And that makes everything kind of crazy for yourself, but it's not strict like Angular, where Angular is just like, hey, you're going to use this HTML, you're going to write HTML for me, right? Whereas React is like, hey, let me do everything between. Vue kind of sits in the middle. Even if you want to say Ember, because Ember is in there as well. They kind of sit in the middle. So they kind of have some openness to them. They allow you to write straight HTML. Vue and Ember, to me, are actually really good from an accessibility standpoint. One, because Vue has a lot of utils from that. Ember is really good because it has a lot of utils, but it has a ton of accessibility support behind the scenes. Just the whole like documentation behind it, tell you how to make your content accessible, which one is super dope. Vue has a lot of accessibility add-ons, not like full frameworks, but add-ons to help make your content accessible. So I always answer this question carefully because every time I say this, everybody's like, oh, I'm going to jump to it right away. I like to lay out what each one does really well. I don't like to say which one does it better than the other. Angular is really strict, React's really open. Vue and Ember do a really good job of laying it out and giving you some help with it. But again, at the end of the day, it still comes down to you with what you want to do from an accessibility standpoint as a developer.
So it sounds like what you're trying to say is that you could make any of them accessible. So you need to first pick out the one that you need to use and then figure out how to make that one accessible.
Yes, right on. Yep, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Awesome. And related to that, Tyler has a question. If I'm introduced to a new code base with hundreds of components, would you add functional component accessibility tests for each individual component or at a global level? Like, how would you best address that?
Sure, that's a really good question too. So usually that's a strategy that I would suggest getting into. So if you use something like, it depends on the framework, but you can use something like Storybook or a way to get some components all on a page, right? You could test multiple components at a time, right, along the way. Or you could kind of take a smaller approach. So if you do have like 500 components, which I've run into, I suggest teams kind of take a smaller approach. So let's get your top 25. What are your top 25 most used components? Let's get those accessible first, right? Let's get automation for them. Let's get some manual testing in place let's check them. And then let's work our way down through. I never say, hey, full sweep, let's go, right? And get into there. That's that's insanity. Sometimes you'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, no. So bring it down, kind of narrow your scope down to like your top 25 and then go with that. Or you can use something like Storybook, put some of those on the page all at once and scan multiple components as long as you know. Those are some strategies I have for that though.
Mm-hmm. That's some good ideas. I like that. Even just simply putting it on one page, you can run that really quickly. So last test, we got a couple of minutes left and they're kind of the same questions. So both Shannon and Jason were asking, do you have any recommendations for learning how to use assistive technology for manual testing? And Jason tagged on, are there any standards out there you could suggest as well?
Yeah, so there's actually a few good things. So one, I'm going to advocate for my company. You should go to the Q because Q University's got cool stuff, how to show you how to use an actual assistive technology. There's actually, if you literally Google, I mean this, if you Google, I am a developer and I want to learn how to use assistive technology, the first thing that will come up is a piece that shows you how to even start from the beginning. So let me bring this back. I was once a dev who was just like, what in the world? What's MBDA? You go to MBDA's site and it'll be a load of like, hey, you already know what you're doing. If you search, I'm a developer, I'm looking for assistive technology, I forget the exact site, it'll break down how to even just use it, what you're looking at, how the breakdown is to go through. That's the one way to start, is do that. The next thing to do is to actually take whatever assistive technology you have, once you kind of get one in there, take it and start messing around with it on an actual page itself and start using it. Because there's user guides for all different ones. So if you're on a Windows machine, non-visual desktop assistant, NVDA, or JAWS, I mean, you have to pay for JAWS. If you're on a Mac, VoiceOver. If you're on your iPhone, VoiceOver. If you're on Android, TalkBack. But using those on an actual site and going through the commands with it. So the Q University public-facing pages actually has commands for NVDA, JAWS. Use those, go through, kind of see how they work. The best advice I can give, the way that I learned it, and everybody's different, is using that basic setup piece to kind of look at, hey, here's how you use it. But then hands-on in it yourself is the best experience you can get with it and using it and seeing kind of from a different perspective with that. The other thing that I say, once you get really good, take your computer screen and put that sucker down and run it and go through a page, or tilt it down so you can't see it one time once you start to get used to it, because that'll give you the ability to kind of see what you're getting into when you're actually using your site, and how usable it is, unusable it is when you go through this. So just a couple of suggestions there too. And Carrie, I don't know if there's any other ones that you had.
I think that's great. I guess, yeah, we're kind of at the top of the hour, so we got to wrap up. But if we wanted to learn more, is there any upcoming conferences that we might want to check out?
Yes, AxeCon. Yeah, so I'll put it in the hook. So upcoming, DQ has AxeCon. It's our first actual conference. It has free conference. Yes. Free virtual conference. Yeah, the virtual world we live in. And I have to say, this talk I did today, plus just a little bit more sprinkled in for AxeCon, is going to be there. But there are literally hundreds of talks, and they're awesome, all of them. So if you get a chance, go to the AxeCon site. It's out on our University page, or just search AxeCon. You can see all of them. There are tons of talks. I cannot even begin to express how awesome the lineup is that we have. So if you get a chance, go check it out. It is March 8th to 10th. Is that what it is? Yes. 9th through 10th? 8th through 10th?
We'll post a link in the chat. We're not marketing people. I don't know.
Yeah, we're not. I know our marketing team's like, what in the world? But March 10th through the 11th. There we go.
There you go.
That's what it is. So come check it out. It'll be fantastic.
Yeah. And with that, we want to close and by saying just thank you so much, Mark. Looking forward to your talk again at AxeCon on expansion on what we did today and maybe some different questions that are answered. So maybe you didn't get your question answered today. You can come back and check them out at that free virtual conference coming up. I mean, it's like in a week or two, not too long from now. So again, the links will be available. I popped a bunch in chat while he was talking today when Mark was talking. But we'll get any other additional links down and we'll pop them into the chat. Again, as a reminder, we're always recruiting new speakers. So if you have an idea, a presentation idea, let us know. Otherwise, we will find you and we will ask you to come on and talk. If you want, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a talk, and visit us on our website as well. So again, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mark, especially, and have an awesome day. Have a dope day, right?
Have a dope day, yeah.
Bye all.